you walk up to the rental counter and give them your credit card and take the keys. It's like that MasterCard commercial, you know, the look. Priceless. What I find most fascinating, however, is not what I'm trying to suggest about my reaction and the reaction that I get from people, but more than anything, how this revolves around the ever-continuing debate around attitude. I find it rather ironic that I get paid significant amounts of money to travel the world saying things like, it's better to have a positive attitude than a negative one. I mean, duh. I think attitude is way more than that. And again, because we're short on time this morning, I'm not going to get into a very detailed, long version of my story. But what I will tell you is that attitude does work, it does matter, and I have the perfect example for you this morning. Let me take you to August 23rd, 1985. Now, a very special day in my life, and a very special day for anybody in this room that is lucky enough to be a parent. Although I would disagree about the idea that having a kid move home is good news. I have a 27-year-old son. He was born on August 23rd, 1985, and of course that was a very special day. Not to relive it, but you know, it is quite a moment for those of you that are fortunate enough to be parents. You do remember, especially the first one. Because the first one is really significant, isn't it? I mean, after the first or second or third or fourth one, usually we kind of get into a groove. Not we, you, I have one. But I remember when they put that baby in my lap, obviously very, very special bonding moment. I also remember what I was thinking. I've never even babysat, and they gave me a person. Anyway, I just think what's interesting is holding that child, very, of course, a special moment. Obviously a cheap speaker tactic to talk about babies. But here is my point. They called us, those deformed by the drug, thalidomide victims. My personal belief system is I was never a victim. I think the moms were the victims. I think the dads were the victims. And August 23rd, 1985 was the first time in my life these two things took place. Obviously, because of the natural progression of being a parent, we learn one very important thing, and that is it's not about us anymore, it is about them, correct? It is a very real lesson in life. A lot of young people, in particular, I know there's very few young people here except you, we can be very self-centered human beings, can't we? Really, can't we? So when we learn the craft and art of turning the table around to it not being about us, and more importantly, being about other things, obviously very personal things to every one of you in this room, we change the dynamic of our attitude. August 23rd, 1985 was more than just the day that my son was born. It was more than the day that I just decided that I needed to be more than about me. It was the first time I ever actually considered how my own parents must have felt the first time they held me. I wonder how that day went. My mother was 55 years old the first time she held me, and my father was 53 years old, and I was an orphan growing up in Yorkton, Saskatchewan. My birth family did not die, but on the fourth day of my life, in the summer of 1960, because of the era, my birth family were told by doctors, this is not an indictment of them, that I would never develop any personal ability, that I would be dependent on the family for the rest of my life, and that they were not going to have an easy time. As it turned out, they were farmers, they were poor, they lived on a farm with no power, no running water, two small children, and absolutely no backup systems. They were very, very, let's just use a modern expression, freaked out by this, and they did not know what to do, but this sounded like a reasonable option. They asked one simple question: what will happen with the child? Well, we'll make sure he is taken care of. So when they signed the papers, I became an official orphan. The government of Saskatchewan, in this case, took over the ownership of my life, and 3 weeks later, I landed in the laps of Hilda and Jack Law. I tell the story of my parents every single day that I speak, not because it's a nice, warm, fuzzy story, but I think my mother is the prototype for the kind of attitude that I talk about every single day in my program. Now again, in British Columbia, people kind of recognize me. I'm really famous in Saskatchewan. That's kind of easy. But the reality is, I have been in the media since 1961. A lot of people don't know this, and I find this kind of just personally fascinating because my mom was a scrapbooker. She kept everything. I currently live with a feng shui consultant and decluttering expert, so that makes this rather challenging. But in 1961, the media was starting to write stories about thalidomide. It had not yet become a big scandal, but the press was being very nosy. Regina, of course, if you don't know this, is 2 hours away from Yorkton. They heard about this baby in Yorkton. They actually called it a sighting, if you can believe that. And they came to Yorkton to interview my mother. They walked in the house, the reporter took a look at me, and this is exactly what he said. Mrs. Law, I've never thought I'd see one of these. It's probably the most pathetic thing I've ever witnessed in my entire life. I gotta tell you, I'm really uncomfortable right now, but maybe I'll just ask you a question so we can get on with this interview. How does it feel? How does it feel to be raising a baby without arms? Now that's a pretty good question, right? Here's Mom's answer. That's a dumb question. How do you think it feels? It's kind of weird. Wouldn't it be weird? How do we pick up a baby, typically? By the arms, right? He gets dropped a lot. How about that? That's exactly what she said. So the reporter goes on, are you trying to make fun of this, Mrs. Law? Well, no, there's nothing funny about this, but I am trying to look at the good side. Really? There is a good side to this? Absolutely. He's starting to use his toes for fingers and his feet for hands. How'd you teach him that? He taught us. He's a baby. Babies teach us lots. You just have to pay attention. I walked in his room one morning. He was dangling his favorite teddy bear between his first and second toe by its left ear. So what'd you do? Reporter said. Mom said, stared. What do you think I did? Weirdest looking thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. Let me just take off my jacket. I'm going to put it on my chair here. This is what it looks like. By the way, I take off the jacket for two reasons. A, I want to show the reality of my physique. But secondly, I hate jackets. Can you imagine trying to wear a sport jacket with no shoulders? I mean, really, fashion is such a bizarre thing, isn't it? Ties, pantyhose, all those things are just dumb. Anyway, here's what it looks like. This is what I get noticed for all the time. Now, does it bother me? Not anymore. Did it used to? A little bit. Mostly in my adolescence. Obviously, that's a tricky time for anybody. But what I had to learn was this is my reality. You know who taught me to handle this was actually little kids. Little kids are so honest, it shakes you up, doesn't it? They have no manners. They're just rude almost, aren't they? They walk right up, pull on my pants. Where's your arms? Good question, isn't it? I'm trying to tell them. They think I'm hiding them. It's hilarious. I go to elementary schools. I got the kindergarten kids in the front row. And by the way, just on a side note, this fascinates me. My wife, Darlene, and I have been very fortunate that we have now traveled to 6 continents around the world. The only reason we haven't gone to the last one is because the penguins don't pay. We have had a chance to do some wonderful things. We were, as I say, just in Romania. I wasn't working in schools there, but I have been in schools in every corner of the planet. The kids are always the same. This is what fascinates me. Their language, their religion, their skin color, doesn't matter to me because I'm fascinated by this. They always sit in the front row. They always look a little nervous at first, and then they always, at exactly 10 minutes into the show, pull their arms inside their shirts, look up at the stage and go. Anyway. Reporter said, when you were done staring, what'd you do, Mrs. Law? And I love this. This is exactly what her answer was, and I think gigantic. Gigantic, not as a statement, but as a belief. We just stopped looking at what he didn't have. How do we, in this world that we live in today, and this is a tough one, how do we live every day with a degree of gratitude, with a degree of thanks, with a degree of understanding how very fortunate we are? I know that sounds extremely predictable, but in my experience in dealing with most people do not really get this. They are funny to me, and not because I'm better than them, and I'm not judging, it's just intriguing to me. My mother was really very much the catalyst, of course, but even more importantly, you need to understand something, and this is not meant to be insulting to any of you, but none of you look really young. A lot of you are probably over 50, yes, and a lot of you may have passed 50 and went, oh, you know what, my best days are over. Really? I think you need to reevaluate that, and I'm not judging your health, and I'm not judging how you feel. I'm saying to you, significance is in the heart and in the mind of the beholder. My mother had no idea what she was doing, and she said that. She took me in because that's what good people do. They do amazing things, but she really didn't know how this was going to work. One day, about 9 months into my life, she was feeding me my baby bottle on her lap, thinking this might not have been the best idea. I wasn't doing anything, I wasn't accomplishing anything, I wasn't advancing like normal babies do, normal being an operative word. She really didn't know what to do. Then she did something that was at most bizarre, at least kind of questionable. She took me to my bed, put me in my crib, put my bottle on the pillow next to me, laid me on my side and plugged my bottle in. Her thought was, maybe he can drink out of this. It didn't work, because all I did was roll over, because you can imagine I'm really good at rolling over. You know that game little kids play, rolling down hills? Remember that game? I always won that. It was awesome. Mom was not a giver-up. That's another thing that I can kind of generalize a little bit about, and again, I am generalizing. I think a lot of people get to their midlife and they either, and again, this is with great respect, they either pack it in or they get rejuvenated. But I think what's fascinating about my mom is she'd been through, like so many of you in this room, so much in her life that she learned not to be a quitter. She learned not to give up on the first failure, because I think that is a significant mindset. So Mother did not quit after the first failure. She tried 15 different configurations over the next 5 days to get that bottle in a way that I could hold it. None of them worked. But one morning she walked in and I was sitting up in the corner and I had the bottle between both my feet and I was sucking away having a great time. So you can imagine even Mom was fascinated, huh? Took me out of my crib, put me on the floor, stuck some toys in front of me and waited to see what would happen next. Apparently, as quick as a flash, I reached out, I grabbed the toy with my toes and I started to play. Now is this the toy? No, this is obviously a hairbrush. I don't need a hairbrush, but when I reach up to do this, I'm showing you this only because I want to give you an example of how I've adapted in my life. Now that seems rather obvious, right? Am I trying to show off? No, but this is kind of impressive. Yes, try to see if you can do this. Sit on a stool, no back on it, stick your legs out and see how long you last. Do you know, let's just recap, and again, this is not to insult your intelligence. I look after myself, I travel myself, I drive myself, I dress myself, I go to the washroom myself, I carry my luggage myself, I travel, and they call me handicapped. To me, one of the most dangerous things that our society presents every single day is the label that we carry around stuck to our forehead. And too many labels are a label that, with due respect, relate to the idea of being victimized by our society. Now, it is true that bad things happen to good people. I don't want to insult that. But the reality is, it's how we take what happens to us that really makes the difference. My mother turned these into my hands. I believe that. And I believe when she did that, my so-called handicap disappeared. The reality, however, is it dominates my life to this day. Now, what does that mean to you? I think you will appreciate this next example and this next story. I was probably not going to have an easy go of things. Can you well imagine that when